This is the John Oakley Show on Talk Radio, AM 640.
When we got into this discussion about Karla Homolka at a couple of points this morning, the issue of her kids obviously is central to what I think is almost irreconcilable. These kids now have got to wear this tag. Maybe they didn't know. How could they have known mom's notorious past? Now they won't be able to escape it. And, for that, I condemn her wholly. There's no question she brought them into the world, which has led a lot of people to question why that was even allowed. David writes, tubal ligation should have been part of her sentence for the heinous crime she committed, or is that considered too much of a cruel and unusual punishment? I think not. And Mike says, how was she allowed to have kids without the Children's Aid Society taking them away? I know females that were in trouble with the Children's Aid Society of the law, and they got pregnant. The Children's Aid Society takes these kids away. Why not in this case? Well, good questions all. There are so many questions abounding now, and the fact that she felt some kind of sense of what? Immunity by coming into Quebec, back to Canada after she was in Guadaloupe, which, by the way, we only found out about 4 years ago because it was written about by journalist Paula Todd in her book, Finding Karla. Paula Todd has joined the Oakley Show to help us figure out exactly how you can track or trace somebody this notorious. Paula, good morning and welcome to the Oakley Show.
Well, it's great to be back, and good morning to you all.
Paula Todd, when I first read excerpts of your book, and this is 4 years ago, I thought, well, this is an intrepid reporter. I mean, and this was before social media would start to already or start a tom-tom network of sorts. It was an arduous task to find her. How did you find her on Guadaloupe?
It's interesting when we talk about all the concern that's being expressed right now about Karla Homolka being back in Montreal and her children back in Quebec. But one of the very first leads that I got online, and it appeared to have been a complaint of a sort coming from a family member in Guadaloupe. When Karla Homolka married Thierry Bordelais, the brother of her criminal lawyer in Quebec, she married into a fairly large family in Guadaloupe, and Guadaloupe is a collection of islands in the Caribbean. It's a French protectorate, which means it's actually part of the country of France. And so I just saw a few little pinpricks of information online. I went to find Karla Homolka because of concerns I read that she might have been teaching young girls under the age of 16, which is one of the conditions that a judge in Quebec tried to impose upon her. But, of course, her lawyer went to court, and she was set free, which she is right now, free to do whatever she wants, including having 3 children.
Well, that's interesting. By the way, did you know she was back in Canada?
I did, actually. We all found out publicly in 2014 when her sister was testifying in another case, in the Luca Magnotta case. I don't know if your listeners remember, but Luca Magnotta pulled Karla Homolka into his series of criminal posts and activities by also using as a return address on one of his grisly parcels of body part. He used the return address of Karla Homolka's remaining sisters. She had 2 sisters, and of course was arranged for the rape by her then husband Paul Bernardo of her baby sister and the ultimate death of her. But she has 1 sister left, and when the sister was on the stand in Quebec, she said that Karla Homolka had returned to Quebec. I wasn't surprised at all, though, because when I was in Guadaloupe, it was clear to me that there was some kind of a family discord down there, that they weren't keen. Some of them were definitely not keen that she'd married into this rather prestigious legal family. So, I suspect it was probably only a matter of time before she returned to Canada.
With journalist Paula Todd, the author of Finding Karla. This came out 4 years ago, still available on Amazon, but the idea that Karla Homolka could be tracked or traced, and yet you knew she was in Canada, I'm guessing because not just, you said her sister was subpoenaed in the case of Luca Magnotta, and to, disavow the notion that she had any connection to Luca Magnotta at the time, but that had surfaced. Did you know that you said she had 3 kids. These stories that are coming out of the school board there in the area in Chateauguay only refer to 2 kids. How old now? We'll do the math, add the 4 years, but how old were the kids that she had when you met her?
Well, her third child was a toddler, just under one, and still breastfeeding. So it's unlikely. I mean, that would explain why there are two kids in school. I think it's important. This really gets to the heart of the matter. I knew before 2014 that Homolka had returned to Canada, just because a number of people, got in touch with me because, like of what's happening now, back then there were parents and neighbors who were, really concerned about her presence in Canada. But I have to say, this is a really difficult question, and we need to get to the heart of it, which is, she has 3 children. There is no law that would allow us to tell somebody they can't have a child, and you certainly can't, right now tell somebody they have to have a hysterectomy so that they can't reproduce. I agree with some of your callers, though. I have to admit that when I finally did find her and I walked into the kitchen where she was living in Guadaloupe, it was more like sort of a porch, a sun porch, and I knew that there'd been rumors she'd had a young boy, but when I saw 3 children playing there, so quiet and innocently in the sunlight, I was shocked. And it's not right of me because they're children, and we live in a country where we protect young people. But her mother is so notorious, and the fact that Karla Homolka decided to have kids after she'd helped torture and kill 3 children of someone else, the morality of that, it's hard for anybody to stomach.
Paula, somebody has actually suggested here in an email to me that perhaps this was a beard or a front. Having the kids would help her in her anonymity, because who would imagine that she would have that kind of gall to bring children into the world? Might even have maybe a moral compass of some setting that would say this is wrong, or there would be public revulsion, or even for the sake of the kids and not having them grow up and find out about their mom, which now seems inevitable. But maybe that was all part of her trying to reclaim some normalcy. Like when you met her, and I understand you spent a tense hour in that sunroom apartment, was she trying to affect some kind of a normal relationship? Did she come across as quasi-normal to you?
Well, that's a brilliant question. I mean, here's one of the strangest things that happened to me while I was there. At one point, she left me in the living room with all 3 of her little children and went to talk with her husband in the bedroom. And I did have this strange sense of knowing that I will always have been a babysitter for Karla Homolka's kids. When she interacted with the children, was relatively normal, except with respect to the daughter, the middle daughter. She sort of described her daughter as being, larger than life and sort of, always trying to get attention. And that worried me a little bit because most of the psychiatric reports about Homolka suggest that she is at minimum a malignant narcissist, which means she doesn't like to share attention with anybody else. When she was interacting with her children, I have to tell you, all of the questions that we have, even these many years later, because Homolka never really leaves our courtrooms, doesn't really leave, every time there's a judicial decision that includes children being harmed, Karla Homolka's name comes up again. But she's very much not aware of all that. She prides herself on never listening to the news. And it was reported at the time of the trial that she didn't like to do that. And when I met her, she made a point of saying, because I've been on TV a lot. Oh, I don't know you. How do I know you're a journalist? I only realized after I had tracked her down that she probably thought I was going to assassinate her, because apparently she'd had a lot of death threats. But with respect to the kids, she acted like she really, really wanted to have them. And she had every opportunity during this hour. I mean, here I was from Canada to talk to me about how distressing, her past was, or how guilty she felt. But she's never done that. And many psychiatrists examined her, and they had this really hard time of trying to explain to the rest of the world that there seemed to be a frozen netherland inside her. I found her highly engaged as an individual, and it's not even that there was a netherland for me. It was like what we are talking about and what we are concerned about, it doesn't concern her in the same way.
So that, would you say it was narcissism that gave you access, her narcissism? She just wanted some kind of attention, even if it might have seemed unwanted at first, that you had discovered her in Guadaloupe and she gives you an hour of her time and even access to her kids that way. Is that what that was about, narcissism?
Yeah, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a journalist and a lawyer, but I will tell you that's a good question. No one's ever asked it, and yet it's one that I have pondered for a long, long time. I think the most important thing to remember, though, is that she had been absent from Canada for 5 years when I tracked her down because I was concerned about, the suggestion she might be teaching children the same age as the ones that she'd helped kill. She definitely enjoyed having somebody there. I got the sense from her that she was quite lonely. She could easily have told me to leave because as a journalist, I identified myself as a journalist, and the rules are that if we're asked to leave, we do. But she never did. In fact, her husband wanted me to leave, and she sort of browbeat him, and no. And I do think she wanted to know how I found her because she had eluded discovery, and she knew, she didn't know, but I knew that there were many media outlets, including the largest ones in Canada, that had been looking for her for 5 years. And I said, I'll tell you how I found you, and I did, I kept my word. But there was something really weird that did happen while I was there. I mean,
Can you hang on to that thought? That's called the hook, as
Sure.
you know. I wanted to hang on to you for a few moments. I still have some more questions, and I'm wondering if we can take some calls. I'm sure people are, curious about this intimate exchange that you had with her. I mean, it's really like staring into the face of evil and, making contact with the devil. So if you can, just a few more moments. Paula Todd
Sure.
is going to stay with us. She's the journalist who found Karla Homolka 4 years ago.
This is scary. You never expect something like that here. You hear about it in all other places and that. You don't expect it in your own community. It's such a calm, collective community. Everybody looks out for everybody, and then hearing this,
it's scary.
It shakes things up.
Well, the neighbors are still aghast. The people at the school earlier this morning, yesterday, there was a lot of revulsion expressed, and now how to resolve this. I mean, there were kids, both the neighbors or the people who have sent their kids to school with Karla Homolka's kids. She has surfaced, yes, in Shadow Gay, moved there in 2014 from the Caribbean island of Guadaloupe, where she had been tracked 4 years ago by the author of Finding Karla, journalist and lawyer Paula Todd, who's with us on the line. Paula got a great question here from Angela. Go ahead, Angela. You're on the Oakley Show.
Hi, thank you. I find this all repulsive and fascinating at the same time. My question, I guess, is, Paula, what was your take on the husband? This is the brother of her criminal lawyer, a man who knows every detail of what this woman has done, how heinous and tragic the whole situation is, and he fell in love with this woman and then decided to have children with her. There's got to be something wrong with this guy. I'm almost afraid we're going to find out that he's some weirdo, sadistic guy who's been moving her all around the world to evade anyone noticing his real personality or something like that.
Well, yeah, there's something, obviously. There's a disconnect for most people with their head on straight. But, Paula, that's a great question from Angela. Did you have access to him, and what was your read?
Sure. He was in the apartment in Guadaloupe the majority of the time that I was interviewing Karla Homolka, and he's different in a way than what we've heard, at least through testimony, about Paul Bernardo. She was very, very much in charge of this current relationship. At one point, when she was calling for him, she wanted him to do something, and he didn't answer. She actually rolled her eyes at me as if, can you believe men? So I'm not convinced that he's the one in charge in that relationship. But I think the question is such a good one, and it helps explain why Canadians are divided about this. You must understand that the reason Karla Homolka was given only 12 years, and then eventually, after she'd served all of them, because she wasn't then pulled into the parole system, she just walked free. And there were attempts to impose conditions, 14 fairly strenuous conditions, which another Quebec court overturned, so that she was allowed to do precisely what she wants. But there were many people at the time, and it was the basis, in fact, of the plea bargain, who believed that she was a battered wife, and that Bernardo, who is so vicious and horrific, that he forced her into doing many of things. And you recall that this whole plea bargain was the deal with the devil, and it wasn't until afterwards that the tape surfaced that showed her actively engaged in all of this torture and abuse that Canadians got really upset. What I suspect, just having seen them, and based on the research I've done, is that I don't really think that Karla Homolka's husband has read every single detail. His sister is a very well-respected lawyer in Quebec who's known for taking the cases of people who society sort of throws away. And she's got one of those, as she's been described to me by others in Quebec, as a very big-hearted woman who believes in the justice system and the ability of people to rehabilitate. And that's what this all really comes down to. She's managed to get married. She very much believes that she's innocent. There's just no question of that after speaking with her, or at least that she shouldn't be punished for her role in what had happened. And she wanted to get on with a normal life. And so, the justice system in Canada said she only had to serve 12 years in jail. What happens to her afterward, whether she gets to go and marry and, all that sort of stuff, is a question Canadians have to ask themselves, and it goes right to the very heart of this. So as far as, I do know that in the Bourdalet family, they're not thrilled that Thierry Bourdalet, married Karla Homolka. It is, I'm sure, difficult to introduce somebody who's been involved in at least 3 horrible deaths and tortures of young women. But what do we do about the fact that innocent children are now out there and potentially going to be punished for the crimes of their mother?
I was just musing, if there's going to be any kind of resolution, it probably would have to happen outside of the Canadian context. She was in Guadaloupe. Maybe she might have to relocate to a deserted island in the South Pacific or whatever, and out of sight, out of mind, at least off our grid and radar. But when she came back, first of all, do you think your outing her or finding her was anything to do with her leaving Guadaloupe? Was there revulsion felt by the folks in Guadaloupe as well?
There was quite a lot of revulsion, and subsequently I learned that there was the possibility she had been teaching girls. She'd been posing as a French English teacher, a language teacher, and when the word got out in Guadaloupe that they had a serial killer living amongst them. It may not be legal, but it's really hard to tell human beings that they should treat somebody who's done such horrific things just as if, they were the same person, who finished school and has never harmed anybody in their life. It's really tough to do that. I do know that prior, though, to my talking with Homolka, her extended family there were members who were really not pleased about having her there either. So, one of the reasons I was concerned about young girls in wherever she was, at that point I didn't know where she was, is we don't have any way of monitoring what's going on. And I know that at the time, here in Canada, some lawyer for the Mahaffey and Kristen French, Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, 2 of the poor dear victims, the lawyer said, well, at least she's gone from Canada. But I don't think that we can do that. I don't think we can say, oh, we have a terrible criminal and we're just going to throw it off into another country where they're less likely perhaps to know what they're up against. It's the Canadian justice system who did this, and it's a good idea, I suspect, to have that justice system try to keep an eye on her. Now, whether something more needs to be done, I don't know. I'd like to make it really clear, though, I am not the one who outed Karla Homolka in Canada. I knew quite a few years ago that she had come back, and I have always been really careful not to identify the children. I was careful not to identify where the family home is in Guadaloupe. And I don't think that I would have gone door to door and asked neighbors if they knew that Homolka was there. And I'm in no way faulting anyone else. It's a legitimate community concern. It's just that I met those kids, and boy, I just thought about how their life is going to be in the future.
Well, they will be impacted. As John underscores your point, John, he says Karla was released from prison in July 2005 without restrictions, and now we're having to live with it. She's in Chateauguay, though, and probably had to know she risked being revealed. That, too, probably speaks to her mindset or character. She's either living in denial or there's such narcissism and hubris, she figures, I can be normal and I'll fly in under the radar.
I agree with you. It's an unusual choice to go to a small town, but typically you'll probably find out that there's a reason for that there's a connection, or perhaps there's a job. I did very much get the sense, though, that she wanted to just ignore the past, and for her, as we were talking, it really felt as if it didn't matter. It hadn't occurred.
She can will it away.
Yeah.
Yeah, she'll just will it away. Paula, it's great to talk, and I thank you for extending the segment. I got to let you go, but again, the book is available on Amazon. It's called Finding Karla from 4 years ago, but it places this current episode into full context. Great for your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take good care.
And you. There you go, Paula Todd, the journalist and lawyer, shared some, great insights into this whole Homolka mindset.
The John Oakley Show. Listen live weekday mornings from 6 till 10 on AM 640 or download the app at 640toronto.com.